Hi, everyone. My name is Yunus. I'm the president of the Association of Science Technology Innovation, ASTI. Welcome to Young Inventors Challenge training program. So this is the first training on problem identification. So in YIC, you are requested or you're required to find a problem and then solve the problem. So we are going to look at the first stage, which is finding the problem. And one of the most important thing about solving problems is to identify the problem correctly first, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today, right? Now, uh, how do we identify a problem correctly, right? Uh, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through the slides very quickly. Please feel free to stop and read the stuff in the PowerPoint. Because I'm not going to read off the PowerPoint, I'm going to talk to you. So listen to what I'm saying first. Then after that, you can pause me for a bit and then read what's on the slides. Okay. Right. So let's talk about this idea of uh, problem identification, right? With an example. So let's say you live in Malaysia and you ask your friend to call you uh, at 10 a.m. and your friend lives in Jakarta, right? Uh, and so you wait for his call, and then he ends up calling you at 11 instead, right? So then when he calls you, then he said, "Hey, why are you calling me at 11? I asked you to call you at 10. I've got something on, so I can't speak to you now. But can you call me tomorrow at 10 a.m.?" And then he says, "Okay." And then the following day he calls you again, but again he calls you at 11, right? And then you ask him and say, "Hey, I asked you to call you at 10. Why are you calling me at 11?" Right? So now you say, "Can you check your clock? Is your clock correct?" Right? Then he says, "Okay, let me have a look, and then I'll make sure the clock is correct, and then I'll call you again tomorrow." And then he calls you again tomorrow, and then again he calls you at 11, right? Instead of 10, where you told him to call you, right? So now what is the problem here, right? Was it really the problem with his watch, right? Or maybe it was with your watch, right? Uh, so if you think the problem was with your watch, with the watch, and he keeps checking his watch again and again and again, and I said this is a very simple, simplified example, and he keeps checking his watch again and again and again, the problem will persist. He'll always end up calling you 1 hour late, right? Now, this is a classic, very simple example of uh, your problem being identified wrongly because the real problem is not with the watch or the clock, but it's with the international timeline, right? Because Indonesia and Malaysia are 1 hour apart. So whenever you call, there will always be a 1 hour difference, right, between Indonesia and Malaysia. Let's say he's calling you from UK, there's going to be an 8 hour difference. So you may ask him to call you in the morning and then he ends up calling you at night, right? So before we can solve this problem, we need to understand that there is this international timeline uh, and somebody in a different country will have a different time uh, to you in a different country. So once you have understood that, right, then you may now tell your friend again, tell you what, tomorrow call me at 10 a.m. but Malaysian time. So then he will know, then he will make the proper adjustments and call you at the correct time. So it's a very simple example in which the problem was identified wrongly, right? So let me look at another example, right? And this example is caused by a bias, right? Uh, right. Let me explain to you what a bias is, right? So a bias is whenever we have certain way of thinking and somebody else has a different way of thinking, these are all biases. So the way we think uh, is is different from the way another person think. Therefore, there's a bias between the two-person thinking, right? So that's basically what the word bias means, lah. So we all have our preferences and stuff like that, right? Now there are many types of biases, and I'm not going to go through all of them in this training. You can always go to YouTube, or you can go to uh, You can Google them or use ChatGPT and find out what are all the different kind of biases out there. But today I'm just going to touch upon two types of biases. One is called the survivor bias. The other one is called the confirmation bias, right? And these are what's called cognitive biases, right? In the previous example of the clock and the time, you had a bias. You asking your friend to call you at a particular time, and your bias is towards Malaysia. So you always assume everybody is on Malaysian time, right? And that's what caused the bias, because you're biased towards the thinking, your own way of thinking, which is everybody is going to be on Malaysian time. When the real fact is not everyone is on Malaysian time. There are different countries may have different times depending on the timeline or the after all, because the Earth is round, so you have different time based on the country that you are in the geographical location, right? Now, let's talk about one particular bias, right? Which is called the survivor bias. So you guys don't have to read what's there first. Maybe you can listen to what I'm saying. Then after that, you can pause and read the stuff there on your own. Now look at the picture, which is a B-40 bomber, right? During World War II, these bombers were sent out on their missions, and they had a very high rate of bombers not coming back, because most of them ended up crashing because they were shot down, right? So the admiral told the engineers, look, I need to reduce the number of uh, uh, planes crashing. That means I want more planes to come back, because after all, when a plane crash, life is lost. So I don't want so many lives being lost, right? So what the chief engineers gave, they had a look at all the planes that came back, and then they mapped out the number of bullet holes, right? So if you look at the red dots there at this thing, at the picture of the plane, those were the places in which they saw a bullet hole, right? So as you can see, most of the bullet holes were at the center, at what's called the fuselage, and also at the periphery of the wings, and also at the back wings, right? So what the engineers thought was, okay, look, this is where most of the bullets are being hit. So what I'll do now, the engineer said, we will reinforce those areas. You see, so the middle area, the fuselage area, the two tips of the wings and the back wing, right? I don't know what's that called, but the wings at the back, right? So we will reinforce that so that when the bullet hits, it won't create much damage to the plane. So they did that, they reinforced all those planes, and then they sent it out again. And when it came back, right, they found that the same numbers came back. That means same numbers of plane. I don't know, maybe about 50% of all the planes. Before it was 50%. And after they reinforced the thing and then they sent out, also 50% planes crashed, right? So Admiral wasn't too happy. He said, why haven't you? I thought we spent all this money reinforcing the planes, and yet the problem is not solved. We still have 50% planes crashing. I can't remember the exact number, but I'm just making, just for illustration purpose, I'm saying it's 50%. So 50% is still 50% after spending all the money and reinforcing those planes in the area that you said you would. And they tried it again and again, and it never did work until one statistician said, wait a second, you are only looking at the planes that came back. What about the planes that did not come back? In other words, the planes that crashed, right? So you did not look at that. So he said, why don't you look at the planes that he hypothesized, right? If you look at those planes, where you do not see those red dots is where probably all the bullets hit, which causes the crash. So basically what he was saying was, in other words, he said, where you see the most bullet holes, those are the safest part of the plane. Because even though there were so many bullet holes in those areas, the plane managed to come back. But where you did not see a single bullet hole, right, or you saw very few bullet holes, these are places where the bullets hit and straight away the plane crashed. So this is what's called the survivor bias. So your data, the number of the planes that you're looking at, you're only looking at the planes that survived the mission, right? So it came back. So it creates a bias, right? The bias is towards the planes that only survived. So what they did was next, they did it again, the reinforcement of the plane, but they reinforced the places in the areas where there was least amount of bullet holes. So they reinforced the cockpit, right, where the bullet, where the pilot is, and also they reinforced the engines and whatnot. But they left those with the most number of bullet holes alone, right? So when they reinforced only those areas, right, they found that the number of planes coming back had reduced dramatically, right? So they managed to solve the problem. So here's an example in which what's called the bias, the survivor bias, caused you to identify the problem wrongly and come up with a solution, which is what you call reinforcing the areas, the wrong areas, right? And then as a result, the problem was never solved because the identification was wrong, right? So here's an example. So this is one very common example, right? The other example, it's of a bias. It's called a confirmation bias, another cognitive bias. And this is what a lot of cognitive scientists would call the mother of all biases, because what they say is most of the different types of biases actually comes from this or have its root in confirmation bias, right? So basically what a confirmation bias says is that if you have a set of beliefs or a set of ideas which you're already comfortable with, you would not want to change because human beings are not comfortable to change. They don't like to change places, or they don't like to change the way of thinking. So if they already got one way of thinking, they do not want to change, right? So whenever they get any information or data that strengthen their existing or pre-existing ideas or pre-existing beliefs, they will take that seriously and they will discard all those which are not confirming their own bias, right? So that's why it's called the confirmation bias. It is the most common bias and the reason in which a lot of problems come up is because of what's called the confirmation bias, right? So a simple example is if you are a person that loves dogs and you see a man being attacked by a dog, you'll assume that the dog uh, is defending itself. Or if you're a person who do not like dogs, that means you hate dogs, right? For whatever reason, right? Whatever past experience you may have had with dogs, and you see a dog attacking a man, you would put the blame on the dog because you hate dogs, and you always say, "Oh, must be the dog." You see, all dogs are vicious, right? So you straight away make the assumption or the conclusion, and you do not study that case on a case by case basis because you, based on your own set of beliefs, you make the conclusion and you don't think about it anymore, right? And the other thing, another example would be in social media. Let's take TikTok and Facebook and stuff like that. The videos that you see, the algorithm in Facebook and TikTok and all that kind of stuff will keep sending you videos that you like to watch, right? Because they want to hold you so that you watch a lot of their videos, right? So the algorithm plays on your confirmation bias. So let's say if the algorithm sees that you like to see certain types of videos, it'll keep sending you those kind of videos. And what happens is your confirmation bias becomes stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger until it becomes really ossified. That means you cannot accept any other opinion, right? So that is something which I think all of us would have problems with. So we should be very mindful when we use social media, right? And be careful of not falling into the confirmation bias trap. Okay. Now, here are some tips, right? These are just 5 tips that I came up on my own. There are many others. You can go to YouTube. You can go again. You can go and do your own research on YouTube and ChatGPT or Google. You can get a lot of others, right? But I've just kind of identified just 5 main things that you can look at to make sure that you don't have that you identify the problem correctly when you're coming up with your solution, right? So number one, always ask questions, the 5 W's and the 1 H, right? Why, what, where, how, all these questions you need to ask, right? That's number one. The most important things that you have to do, keep asking questions. And then understand the environment. So if you have a problem, there will be an environment around the problem. Understand how the environment affects the problem, right? Or is the environment actually creating the problem? Or is it environment making the problem worse or better or stuff like that? So you need to understand the environment, the context, so to speak. You need to understand the context of the problem. Then you also need to make sure that you do as much research and gather as much information as possible related to the problem, right? Looking at all the different aspects, which is related to number 4 as well, perspective, right? All the different aspects of the problem, right? So you need to look at the problem from the environmental point of view, look at the problem from the people point of view, from the administrators point of view, from the engineering point of view, and stuff like that. You need to look at the problem from all the different directions. And one of the ways to do it is to ask the right kind of people, right? So you can ask experts. So let's say there's a problem related to structures of a building, then a good person to ask would be an architect or a civil engineer. If the problem is related to some electrical equipment or whatever, a good person to ask would be electrical engineer, for example. So ask the experts and also ask the person affected by the problem. So let's say there's a problem and that problem is affecting this particular person. You should go and ask that person itself. So for example, just now, the example I gave just now, the person that was bit by a dog, you should ask to understand what happened. You should ask the person that was bit by the dog, why was he bit by the dog? And then you also need to ask the dog's owner, right? So get the different perspective. Then only you can identify the real problem so that you can come up with a proper, equitable solution. And finally, always be mindful. So, when you identify, so take YIC, for example, you identify a problem and then you brainstorm and then you come up with solutions, different kind of solutions, you test your solutions, and then you come up with the solutions that you like, and then you test your solutions and stuff like that, right? The particular solution that you have chosen to give to YIC, the final solution, or the final invention, prototype. As you go through this process, always keep in mind the actual problem itself. Keep asking yourself that question. The questions that you ask at the very beginning, as you go through the process, keep asking those questions. Because as you understand things better, the same question will yield different answers, right? So when you are starting something, you ask one question, it will yield one kind of answer. And then halfway through, you ask the same question, because now you are more experienced, you have learned more, you have done more research, you will actually answer it differently. And then you come up with solutions. Even when you have already come up with a solution, you ask back the same question, you would actually have different answers. So always be mindful of what you do, wherever you are at whatever time, keep asking this questions. And don't be shy to ask the same questions. Don't say, "Oh, I've already asked this question before. Why should I ask again?" No, keep asking it again and again, so that you are always mindful that you don't have any biases, and you are really solving the actual problem itself, right? And then, as I said, at the end, we have already come up with a prototype, and then you test the prototype, and the problem still persists. Keep in mind, it could be your solution, your prototype. There's a problem with your prototype, or it also could be that the problem that you identified was wrong. So you actually came out with a prototype that doesn't address the problem, right? So keep that in mind. So with that, you can have a look at this yourself. I'd like to thank you for your time. For more information, please reach out to us. And if you have any questions regarding problem identification, please email us as you go through this process of YIC. Thank you, guys. Bye.